The first season of Total Drama was great, partially just because of how unique it was. The idea of an animated spoof of reality TV was fairly fresh, so the first season didn't really have much of a challenge to be fantastic. It isn't to say that it wasn't great in its own regard or in retrospection, as Island's use of stereotypes to effectively introduce 28 characters pretty seamlessly and to great effect comedically will always be impressive. The second season of the show had more of a challenge, as it needed to morph the gimmick of the show that was the basis of the first season into a franchise. And while Total Drama Action is generally regarded as the worst of the 26 episode seasons of the show, I think that it gets more flack than it deserves. It has fantastic challenges, arguably the best in the series, and its unique identity has helped it age extremely well despite its butchering of some characters, namely those who already had a complete arc in the first season, such as Gwen or Trent. Action is still able to hide some of its flaws of characterization behind what is left of the novelty of the concept from the first season, as new additions such as the Aftermath really help the show feel more complete. But by the time the third season, Total Drama World Tour, was ready to premiere, all the novelty of the first two seasons had run out. This season needed to be good on its own, or the show was likely doomed to forever be the parody that lasted too long. The entirety of the franchise was resting on this season's ability to deliver, and as you can see from the title of this video, it certainly did. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. We're going to go through some of the subplots and ideas that make this season so fantastic, and break down how it all comes together to create the most complete product that Total Drama has ever put out. Also, one quick note is that the quality of clips in this video is garbage, and that is because unlike the first two seasons, Total Drama's HD remaster has not been released on Netflix, and therefore the only way to access it is a screen recording of an Italian streaming service complete with a huge watermark and some awful echoing between frames. The alternative is using the old standard definition clips, which in my opinion look a little bit worse overall, so we're just gonna have to suffer and use what we got. Really, this season is beautiful, and it's kind of a shame that there's no really great way to watch it. Anyway, let's just get into the video.
I know, right? Let's fly! Watch out! Ooh.
This video will eventually start jumping all over the place in regards to the series' chronological order, but for now, let's go ahead and jump into the season premiere, Walk Like an Egyptian, Part 1. This episode is actually pretty packed compared to some of the other season premieres in the show, as we get both the beginning of most of the season-long arcs, as well as an introduction to the gimmicks of the season. This rapid pace is partially made possible by the fact that almost all these characters have been around for 3 seasons now, and Alejandro and Sierra got a focus episode at the tail end of Action. More on that throughout the course of this video, as well as the whole songs gimmick, but what I really want to talk about is the title aspect of this series, being of course the fact that it takes place over a world tour. To be to the point, I love this aspect of the season. I think part of the reason that the initial set of 3 seasons are so much more memorable is their willingness to commit to their gimmick. Island commits to being a summer camp through some of the challenges, as well as the living accommodations and general layout of the island. In Action, every single challenge is linked to a movie genre, and here in World Tour, the show travels across the entire globe, integrating that into its challenges and songs. It's not really a complete coincidence that the next 3 seasons, which gimmicks include having new characters or mixing new characters with old characters, even though the finale is just going to be 2 characters from the last season anyway, or whatever Packet Island had going on with its survival stuff, are generally seen as the worst seasons. And to further this point, when Redonkulous Race completely switched formats to parodying a completely different show, it created the best season the show had made in 6 years. Of course, Dramarama kind of breaks this trend, but to get back to World Tour, it's really stinking fun to watch each episode to see where Chris takes them next. The locations are incredibly dynamic, both in locale and in popularity. Of course, the show's Canadian roots leads to a disproportionately large amount of Canadian locations, but the variety of destinations is really fantastic, and the show does a good job in spacing out any places that may be somewhat similar. And when the show visits a specific city or landmark, it affects every aspect of the episode, from obvious things like the visuals and challenges, to occasionally subtle ways like the songs, or sometimes even thematically, such as when Tyler physically and thematically flies too close to the sun and greases pieces. It's such a core part of the season, and it's executed fantastically. Also, another thing that plays into this is the living accommodations for the contestants this season, being Chris's plane. The writers do a great job in utilizing the plane's format for their storytelling, especially through the split between first and economy class. Having 2 of the teams facing each other directly instead of the old team-specific cabins allows for the show to have both the original team-specific conversation from Island and first class, as well as cross-team communication creating an economy. Alejandro and Heather really thrive in this format, as their use of the plane ends up propelling them to be the leaders of their respective teams. It's also a great watch to see the various ways that Chef either does or doesn't land the plane, giving a sense of tension to the beginning dialogue of each episode. All of this comes together to create arguably the most thematically consistent season in the franchise, giving all 26 episodes a distinct vibe that separates them from anything else the show has to offer.
Well, I enjoyed this ice cream cone.
Team victory!
Alright, from this point in the video, we're going to start traveling all across the season, focusing more on story arcs rather than specific episodes. Don't worry though, I'm still going to leave the last 3 episodes for their own section at the end, but everything else is fair game. Anyway, there's no better group of contestants to start with than the ironically named Team Victory. I didn't really mention it in the last section, but this season also has the gimmick of having 3 teams rather than 2. The reason I didn't mention it is because the show doesn't end up really utilizing it much, instead shoving all the characters they don't really care about onto one team so that they can protect the ones that actually matter until about the halfway point. And yeah, I would be lying if I said this approach didn't work, but I would also be lying if I said it wasn't a bit underwhelming to watch an entire team dissipate before anyone else on the other teams are allowed to be touched. Anyway, to get into Team Victory a little bit, first off the team is Ezekiel, which is kind of a pretty controversial part of the season. On one hand, it's cool to look for all the cameos he has as he stows away on the planes, and the stowaway idea in general is a really neat concept for the season. On the other hand, it feels a bit undeserved to watch Zeke become unrecognizably feral as he is constantly abused by Chris. The first time he's used in a challenge in London, it doesn't end up mattering at all, and the second time in the safari, it just feels kinda cruel rather than funny. Obviously, there's a bit more of Ezekiel left to discuss when we get to the finale, but in general, I find his appearances in World Tour to range from kinda funny to just kinda hard to watch. What isn't hard to watch is the rest of Team Victory, which contains some of the most fun characters in the entire franchise. Harold, of course, is still fantastic, and although his best moments in the season come in the aftermath after his elimination, his last episode in the competition, Super Happy Crazy Fun Time Japan, is one of the funniest of the season, and he's a large reason for it. Bridget's downfall in the Yukon is definitely a bit off character, but its functionality and showing Alejandro's dominance of the game is definitely worth it, and it's another pretty solid episode. Similar story in Germany with Lashana, although letting her beat up Heather in her final competition episode in the franchise definitely feels like a solid send-off to the character, as well as her song in the next aftermath. After taking an episode off from demising in the Amazon, Victory goes right back on track in Paris when Lindsay gets the boot. Lindsay in this season is a bit odd to talk about really. After her depiction in action was nothing short of terrific, it's a bit weird to go completely back to the brain dead Lindsay in World Tour. I mean, she's still funny, and I even like the whole forgetting Tyler thing, but besides her optimism for arriving in places like New York and Paris, there's really not much Lindsay to get excited about in this season, and you're really not going to find a better Lindsay outing in All-Stars either. Whatever, I kinda get that they had already reached Lindsay's peak in action, so cutting her out of the season early was probably the right play, even if I wish they did more with her in the aftermath like they did with Bridget and Harold. Still, Lindsay has slowly become one of my favorites from the series over time, partially because my comedy has regressed to haha dumb girl funny, so I still get a kick out of it every time she's on screen. Anyway, we're already at the end of the team with the de facto team leader, DJ. DJ's gimmick this season is the curse that he gets in Egypt, being that he's constantly hurting animals. It's kinda funny, although giving it to a character that gets eliminated fairly early was definitely the right play. Anyway, the season definitely struggles in deciding whether or not DJ wants to be eliminated, just as it struggles in deciding whether or not someone's allowed to quit. More on this later, but Duncan is pretty clearly allowed to quit, only for Chris to retroactively be mad at him for doing it. Here, DJ wanting to quit or not really switches nearly every single episode, coming to a head in the episode Noof Kids on the Rock, where Alejandro and Heather fight over getting DJ to essentially join their team through an alliance. It's a better episode for both of them than DJ, but seeing him get over his curse, even if just for an episode, is pretty satisfying. Anyway, DJ and Team Victory going out on an animal abuse ride of chaos in Jamaica is a pretty fitting way to end this part of the season, right before the mid-season split. Overall, Team Victory more or less exists to give some final moments to some of the most iconic characters in the franchise, to give Alejandro some time to establish his dominance over the game, and really just to stall so that Team Chris is really hot and Team Amazon can stay intact for 13 episodes. And in fulfilling those goals, it's pretty successful.
For someone to strip him down, and Tyler do that to you.
Alright, moving on from Team Victory, we're now going to move on to our next team, being Team Chris is really hot, which will only be referred to as Team Chris from now on. Anyway, we're not really going to be talking about all of them right now, as Alejandro and Duncan fit better in different sections of this video, so we're really just going to be talking about Owen, Izzy, Tyler, and Noah. This team is really stinking fun. Tyler and Noah specifically get a lot of credit comedically for this season, and while I don't think that's entirely wrong, I'm a sucker for Owen and Izzy's shenanigans too. Izzy's the first one out of the group, and unlike usual, she's actually gone for good after this. She's not really a huge part of the season, really only interacting with Owen, but just like Island and Action, their relationship is still as dysfunctionally chaotic as ever, and really culminates fantastically well in Oh My Izzy. Izzy becoming really smart is a weird but fitting place to end her character in the show, even if it does get reversed pretty quickly in the aftermath following. Anyway, Noah's the next to go, and while World Tour does give him more screen time than Island by a gigantic margin, they still cut him out pretty early in his first possible elimination ceremony and before the halfway mark in the season. Still, he gets plenty of zingers.
Cody's got a tiny sausage.
And his friendship with Owen really buds into something worth expanding, which they luckily get in Redonkulous Race. Him figuring out Al before almost anyone else is pretty impressive too, and his depiction really ends up being one of the most memorable of the season. Tyler's out next, and if Noah's zingers were brought up to a 10 this season, then so were Tyler's physical gags. While Cody takes a good number of them, Tyler takes quite a beating this season. Most of them are pretty funny though, and they're a little less common than they were in his couple of episodes in Action. His relationship with Lindsay is kept pretty limited, only really coming up in Klein and Lindsay's elimination, both being really fun moments for their characters. His weird friendship with Al definitely tries to be the World Tour's Heather and Lindsay, even if it fails to ever really come together cohesively, mainly due to a lack of screen time, but it's still a pretty fun angle for Tyler's character and a nice parallel with his girlfriend. Owen lasts pretty long this season, and even if I have a big soft spot for the character overall, I think that he probably could have gotten the boot a little bit earlier. He really doesn't have a place in the season after the elimination of Noah and Izzy, besides perhaps carrying a few episodes comedically. The fact that two of my favorite bits from the entire season are both from Owen and are in back-to-back episodes will forever be impressive, those being Joker Owen and him just wanting to win a silver for Canada. Owen's silver medal confessional might just be my favorite in the franchise.
As a kid, I always fantasized about being an Olympian as I listened to the national anthem, bringing home another silver for Canada.
Anyway, seeing him essentially get to torture Blaineley in his last total drama competition episode in Aftermath works really well as a send-off to the guy, even if he does get Redonkulous Race 6 years later. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the non-Duncan and Alejandro members of Team Chris. Part of the reason why Total Drama World Tour is my favorite season of the show is because it's also the funniest, and these four are a big reason why. Sure, other characters like Lindsay and Harold have some fantastically hilarious moments, and Chris is as funny as ever, but Team Chris does a lot of the heavy lifting and making the show constantly gut-busting.
I love it when people call me baby.
Make a mental note of that, bro.
I don't have a pen.
These characters just work so well together. So even if characters like Tyler and Noah, and especially Izzy, probably don't really make any sense in winning a season, they make for some fantastic jokes along the way. So while I get wanting to leave Courtney and Duncan in the game as long as possible, it still definitely hurts watching these four get eliminated essentially back to back, besides a quick Gwen excursion in Australia. Speaking of which, unlike the last two sections, which largely focus on a specific team or most of its members, it's a lot easier to talk Courtney and Gwen in conjunction with Duncan. This season is really pretty odd when it comes to Duncan. Even though he quits with pretty much zero intervention or complaining from Chris also apparently immediately tried to track him down after kicking him out of the plane, and is seemingly fairly upset at him when he shows back up. It almost feels like the show wrote the first episode without any intention to bring him back, only to change their mind later. Anyway, Duncan is largely absent for the first half of the season, leaving Courtney and Gwen to form a relationship. For the first 10 or so episodes of the season, the only thing that either character really does is form a bond with the other over eliminating Heather. The show is really pretty good about spreading this over 10 episodes instead of what Total Drama usually loves to do, which is shove the entirety of a season's worth of development into a single episode only for it to break in the next. Spreading it out over like 4 hours of content makes their bond seem a lot stronger and more important in the nature of the show in the same amount of screen time, and just increases the impact of it being broken a few episodes later. Anyway, besides just some general Duncan and Gwen closeness during the first episode, it really becomes clear that Gwen is crushing hard on Duncan when she and Courtney become closer in New Kids on the Rock. It really creates a kind of weird love triangle where it's less of a love triangle and more of just a love line between Gwen and Duncan, while Courtney just kind of screams at him. I mean, I guess Duncan and Gwen are the ones that fall here, but Courtney just kind of sucks in her interactions towards Duncan, so it's easy to see why he would want someone like Gwen over her. Anyway, Duncan's re-arrival in London doesn't last long in preserving his relationship with Courtney, as he kisses Gwen in the last scene of the episode, setting up the whole boyfriend-kisser arc. I wish they had spread this storyline over more episodes, but we still get 3 full episodes in the saga. Greece is where it all really pans out though, and it really creates my favorite episode of the season. The song between Gwen and Duncan is fantastic, Alejandro constantly trying to get the truth out of Tyler is terrific, and the blow-up at the end from Courtney really ties it all together to create a fantastic episode. Everyone's reaction to this, especially Cody's, really makes the cast feel as together as they ever have, as it does occasionally feel like the characters are split into sectors for their stories, so it's nice when they all mix together for big moments like this. Anyway, Courtney freaking out over the next couple episodes definitely ranges from annoying, like when she's just crying, to hilarious, like when she belts out the power ballad Boyfriend Kisser. It's a pretty solid storyline in general, as they weave together this beautiful web of character dynamics with Al, Heather, Sierra, and Cody all getting involved. Gwen and Duncan don't really get any screen time worth talking about, although watching Duncan not become jealous at all with Al flirting to throw Courtney off her game was good to see. It would be very total drama to have Duncan suddenly realize his feelings for Courtney, and I was pretty impressed with the decision to not have them regret his decision immediately, because they would never ever have Duncan fall back in love with Courtney.
You think she was watching?
Anyway, Gwen's eventual elimination is a bit disappointing too, as the episode builds up such a solid justification for Courtney to be the one to go home, only for them to switch last second because Cody couldn't see and Gwen's allergic to eucalyptus. Whatever though, as Courtney's trip home is arguably even more aimless. It definitely feels like at this point in the season, the show had gotten bored of everybody besides the final 4, and was just trying to cut down to them as fast as possible. I mean, sure, watching Duncan and Courtney hate each other in Niagara Falls was a fun send-off to their relationship for the season, but after Courtney just kind of gets screwed out of a tiebreaker, Duncan just kind of exists to act as a buffer between Sierra, Cody, Alejandro, and Heather from the finale. And I get it, Duncan doesn't really have any fun dynamics with the last 4 campers to justify him moving past his position of 5th, but it really doesn't make any sense why Al and Heather wouldn't just target the automatic alliance of Cody and Sierra. Also, Duncan could have just voted for Sierra or Heather to force a tiebreaker instead of wasting his vote on immune Alejandro, but I think the writers just kind of panicked when it came to Chris reading the votes and just kind of vomited out something that really didn't make any sense, but whatever, it's a messy end to a messy arc. Overall, the Duncan, Courtney, Gwen debacle has some really fun stuff during the 3 episodes in which all of them are in the game, but it completely falls apart once Gwen goes home. Anyway, it's good while it lasts, does a pretty good job of letting Al and Heather take control of the game, and we got some great songs out of it. Speaking of which,
This is mess. You're singing in a plane.
What did you expect? Chris is freaking insane.
alright, I've been alluding to it a bit in this video, but it's finally time to talk about the songs. I'll go over their overall effect on the season in general after, but first I'm going to rank all 30 songs this season, based on both the music and the accompanying visuals. Also, one last thing, we're only focusing on main songs here, so nothing that's only a few verses like Sierra's song in Germany, or anytime Courtney tries to sing in Hawaiian style. But reprise and aftermath songs are fair game. Anyway, I'm going to try to keep this pretty brief. It'll be long no matter how fast I go, so this will probably have to be somewhat of a speed round. Number 30, A Chinese Lesson. This one's hardly a song. I find it hard to even compare to some of the other ones on this list because it's broken up into so many pieces by the challenge. Add in some cultural insensitivity and the gross out at the end, and we definitely have ourselves the last place. Number 29, Ein Klein. Well, they can't all be winners. A lack of anything visually interesting or any sense of musical or lyrical rhythm keeps this one from ever being worth remembering. Lindsay remembering Tyler is still cute, I guess, but it really doesn't do much for the song. Number 28, Wake Up. Yeah, this one's just kind of bland. It's not really bad by any means, but on a list of truly great tracks, it's bound to wind up pretty low on the list. Sierra's mumblings in the middle don't help, and there's nothing visually worth noting. Number 27, Paris in the Springtime. This one feels both simultaneously long and like it just needed some more non-Sierra parts. Sarah's verses don't really have any rhythm and the chorus is just terrible. Jumping through the paintings is a neat visual effect that kind of saves this song, but it eventually just becomes Sierra singing poorly while standing still. Number 26, Sisters. So it's kind of hard to rank this song. On one hand, it just kind of sounds bad and isn't fun to watch at all. On the other hand, some of that's on purpose, and it's a nice send-off to Lashana's character. Still, there's only so much Harold strutting can do to save this one. Number 25, I'm Gonna Make It. Besides just being a shameless Life on the Highway ripoff, this one also kind of just feels samey from the 28 tracks that came before it. The little piano bit with Al and Heather in the middle just kind of makes me wish we got more of that instead of this fairly bland but sorta catchy track. Number 24, Her Real Name Isn't Blaineley. The first of back-to-back Blaineley tracks, this diss track lacks any neat visuals or great deliveries to justify a full minute of auto-tuned digs at a character that nobody cares about. Kind of a waste of the Drama Brothers to not have Harold drop a verse too. Number 23, Sea Shanty Mix. It's a large group song, arguably the last of its kind in the season. Obviously, the sea shanty stuff is neat and all, and I love Izzy randomly catching and dancing with a giant fish, but no hilarious bars or crazy visuals in this one, and the ending with DJ just kind of feels off. Number 22, Rowan Time. Slightly worse than Levin Time, partially due to a lack of any neat animation, and also partially due to just being second. This part from Lindsay is hilarious though.
These cats are getting killy.
Number 21, Levin Time. Slightly better than Rowan Time. It's fairly catchy, but there's a lack of memorable verses here. I like Alejandro taking control of the mic early, and the Black Pyramid background is cool, but nothing else really sticks out in this early season song. Number 20, Blainerific. Lyrically and musically, the song's pretty average, but I really love the song's vibe of following around Blaineley through a bunch of wacky scenarios. Still, there's no super catchy chorus, and the part in the middle where she just kind of yells at Cody definitely drags on. Number 19, Save This Show. Extremely catchy chorus and some hilariously blunt auto-tune Jeff bars make this a pretty solid song, but a lack of a real identity prevents it from being any higher on the list, even though Jeff's Jeopardy bar is really stinking funny.
Jamaica, they can't even Jeopardy.
Number 18, Who You Gonna Root For? Great Hawaiian song to fit the setting. I really like Jeff and Bridget's summary of the season, even if it's a bit bland, but I'm always a sucker for a Harold verse. Harold's ad-libs during Courtney's short verse are funny too, but the song's abrupt ending keeps it from feeling complete. Number 17, Before We Die. It's great to hear from pretty much every contestant here, and some of their ideas for survival and bucket list items are funny too. One of the least interesting visually though, as it eventually comes down to P&G spinning in a circle. Number 16, Come Fly With Us. Really good opener for the season. A lot of characters like Zeke and Noah and Izzy have really memorable parts, even if the visuals are a bit bland. The ending is a bit slow though, partially due to them also having to explain the whole you have to sing rule. Number 15, I'm Sorry. I've always loved Bridget's vocals here, but there seems to be something else to catch each time you listen. From Sasquatch and Aqua to Jeff's best delivered line in the series.
International TV, huh? In front of all my friends.
To Harold and just some generally clever verses, this song ends up being great all around. Number 14, We Built Gwen's Face. Besides just the hilarity of the song's topic and everybody's great outfits, this ABBA tribute is really great. The use of some good choreography and Courtney's singing ability to really sell this parody is fantastic. Number 13, Shear the Sheep. This song should be boring, there is hardly any connection to any arcs going on in this episode, but everything about this song visually is just so great. From the concert vibes, to this hilarious sheeps with lighters, to the specific shot that an adult drew of a teenager, this song's visuals are seriously sick. Number 12, Gypsy Rap. Fantastic beat, and I love the breakdown and visuals during Gwen's verse. It definitely feels short though, as if perhaps Courtney was meant to have a verse. Either way, great song, as long as you ignore some uncomfortable parts about the zing zings 10 years later. Number 11, Boyfriend Kisser. I really feel like I'm repeating myself, but this track is just seriously catchy. Add together some fantastic verses, some really clever visuals, and more rhymes for Kisser than you can ever imagine, and you have one super memorable track, especially for its place in the whole Gwen, Duncan, Courtney triangle. Number 10, Condor. You know, it's pretty rare in the season to find Cody singing all by himself for more than a couple words, so singing me a whole verse is sick. And the fact that it's on one of the funkiest beats in the season, and Al's first couple of lines are so stellar, and it's another great song. Number 9, Changing Guard Mix. Perhaps the funniest in the entire season. Some great vocal performances here from Noah and especially from Courtney at the end, and the subject matter keeps it funny the entire time. The uncensored cut is worth a listen if you can find it too.
I can only strip Cody, and he can only strip me.
Number 8, Stuck to a Pole. Absolute bop, made even better by the hilarity of Bridget's muffled voice and the Amazon girls just happily singing the chorus. No neat animated effects, but the lyrics more than overcome it. Number 7, I'm Winning This. Owen, Harold, and Courtney are 3 of my favorite vocalists from the season, so this one was bound to be fantastic. The song taking place while they're all surfing is great, and Owen suddenly using Blaineley as a board is hilarious. really great overall. Number 6, Greek Mix. Courtney was right, Duncan really can sing. The whole mauling thing at the end kind of lets this one down, but from the great instrumental to the fantastic use of the settings, to the great statues of Courtney and Tyler, this ends up being one of the most memorable of the season. Number 5, What's Not to Love. Really, what's not to love about a bunch of Canadians writing a song about NYC? The monochrome characters look great here, and so many of the verses are hilarious. Lindsay and Courtney are the real standouts in this real standout of a track. Number 4, This Is How We Will End It. This is Alejandro's shining moment musically. Sure, he has some pretty solid tracks before and after this, but animating him as a puppet master is fittingly perfect, and the song fits his villainy really well. Heather's vocals are great too, and I love how they reuse the opening verse. Fantastic song. Number 3, Baby. This track is really fun. Harold's scientific bars are hilarious, the Drama Brothers still kill, and the beat, especially during Harold's second verse, is really, really good. Add in some clever visuals and you have one of the highlights of not just the season, but the franchise as a whole. Number 2, Verses. This song is fantastic, easily the most cinematic of the entire series. The immediate switch into this episode's art style fits beautifully with the beat, that fits beautifully with how Harold puts it, evil versus wicked. Speaking of which, Harold and Courtney each have terrific lines in this song that work really well in between Heather and Alejandro battling out as giant titans. I'll talk more about it when I go in depth on the finale, but this song really culminates the entirety of Heather and Alejandro's relationship throughout the entire season. Number 1, Oh My Izzy. Emotional backing, unique animation, and one of, if not the best vocal performance of the season, and you're bound to land high on this list. But it's really the small things like Owen flying past memories of Izzy from the season that really propel this one into being my favorite. If I don't stop, I could go on about this song for an entire video, but I really should focus on the effects of the song in general on the quality of the season. And yeah, there's really not much to talk about because obviously these songs help the quality of the season a ton. I mean, I would say that 24 out of 30 of these tracks are great, and it's this consistency that gives you something to look forward to in every single episode. For a show that's generally made pretty cheaply, it's just kind of stunning how great some of the beats and visuals are that they get for these tracks. The songs in the season add on to nearly every single arc, giving each character some time to sing and really contribute to the season's feeling of grandiose. Anyway, this section really could have been its own video. I mean, I've been talking about music for over 1900 words, but there's really no way to overstate how great or impactful these songs are for the season. Moving on from the songs.
Who's ready for some totally dramatic aftermath?
Continuing from action is the Aftermath specials, and there are 4 this season, but since I'm leaving the last 3 episodes of the season for their own section at the end of the video, we're only going to be talking about the first 3 this time around. Anyway, the first Aftermath special deals with somebody who has been a major player in every Aftermath before in Bridget, and reintroduces somebody who's going to be a major player in every one after in Blaineley. Now, Blaineley did appear in Celebrity Manhunt in between seasons, and I think that if they were going to put her into the main show, that the Aftermath was the perfect way to do it. Now, that if before putting her into the main show is pretty big, because I'm not really sure that she should have been in the show to start with. Her appearances fail to ever be funny or worthwhile, and once she gets into the show as the ultimate waste of a really neat idea on the comeback challenge, she lasts 2 episodes and is sneakily eliminated alongside Courtney. And yeah, she does have some great moments in Blainerific and Silently and I'm Winning This, but I really can't get myself fully invested in an adult in this teenager competition. Like, Chef and Chris are far enough removed for it to work, but it's just kind of strange in Blaineley's case. Anyway, enough about Blaineley. Bridget and Jeff are really the focus of the first Aftermath special, and then they kind of duck out of the spotlight for the next 3. I think this was the right decision for the season, as their relationship kind of makes the Aftermaths in action a bit frustrating at times, so making the focus of this set of Aftermaths more dynamic really works out. All of the Aftermaths this season really have unique focuses that kind of make each episode stand out pretty significantly, with the first focusing almost entirely on the Bridget Alejandro situation, the second being the telethon, and the third having the comeback challenge. Really, all 3 of these are pretty solid, but the second one, Aftermath Revenge of the Telethon, is really the standout. Despite not having any songs as fantastic as the first Aftermath or the fourth Aftermath, this telethon is just consistently funny throughout.
Extortion? Nice one, bro!
And it feels a bit formula breaking for the incredibly formulaic show that is total drama, even more than a typical Aftermath. The set just completely falling apart is hilarious and easily makes up for the whole Deus Ex Machina feeling of the whole thing. But even in doing more focused Aftermaths, the show still manages to get the same advantages of the more laser-focused ones from last season, as we get to spend some time with eliminated contestants, which really pays off for certain characters like Harold and Lashana, as well as giving a somewhat happy ending to Gwen and Trent. Overall, these 3 episodes are are a great change of pace for the season that space out an otherwise pretty packed first 20 episodes. While I think the whole Blaineley-Jeff feud was overdone and a bit inherently flawed, it's still a solid part of the season that I was really glad to see them continue from action.
I made a vow that Cody's the only man for me.
Okay, before we get into anything related to these characters, I think it's imperative to state the obvious. Sierra is clearly, without a doubt, the one in the wrong here. Being well-intentioned doesn't matter. She isn't just stalking Cody, but harasses and assaults him throughout the course of the season, and the happy ending that she gets obviously doesn't match what she does. However, Total Drama isn't a fable, it's a comedy. And even if Sierra's arc this season, and the way the show portrays her isn't fair, it sure is hilarious. While not the most consistently funny part of World Tour, Cody and Sierra definitely have a copious amount of gags that come out really solid. Anytime Cody rediscovers the idea of actually using Sierra's affection to his advantage usually comes with a good laugh, and Sierra's erratic behavior leads to some great gags outside of just interacting with Cody. Overall, I think that Cody and Sierra ends up being one of the few parts of this fantastic season. Besides the occasional fun gag, I really never found myself excited to see these two interact. Every time they get a focus, it just drags on. Part of this is because they're in every single episode of the season, but there's just so much Sierra and Cody, and the story between them never really developed. It's like they wanted to make it so that Cody slowly becomes more and more accepting of Sierra, but just realized how weird that was and decided to reverse course. I mean, Sierra finding out that Cody voted for her the first time is this huge blowout that leads to a rare boring song and a bunch of scenes where the outcome is strikingly obvious, and yet the payoff for all of that is Cody still voting for her every single time, and Sierra knowing this and ending up not caring anymore. The fake marriage and family thing too just kind of feels like the show throwing their hands up and being like, what if she drugs him into a coma and pretends they have children or whatever? And it's that thought that brings me to perhaps the hottest take in this video. So if you've been itching to complain in the comments, then get ready. I think both Sierra and Cody should have been eliminated about a dozen episodes before they were. I think a lot of people are more in love with the idea of Cody in the final three rather than it actually happening, and the Sierra and Cody dynamic has more than run its course by the time the teams merge. I really think that there's a lot of tinkering that could be done to make the season flow a bit better in elimination order, as is the case in almost every season of the show, but this video is about the season we got, not the season we could have. So just to give some final thoughts on why this is really the only main part of the season I don't really care for, I think it's just an arc that has no real emotional or dramatic substance to latch onto, forcing you to have to laugh at the joke, which while occasionally funny, become a repetitive slog by the time Sierra goes bald. Anyway, I know this section was kind of short, but for one of only 2 character arcs that last throughout all 26 episodes, there's really only so many ways to say that this arc is too long, too boring, and not funny enough to justify either of those descriptors. Alright, after talking about every single contestant in the season, we're finally down to the final 2, Alejandro and Heather, which are the only reasons this video isn't called Total Drama World Tour Mediocre Mayhem. To start from the beginning, even from the very first episode of the season, the show is setting up Alejandro and Heather's rivalry, which serves as the main plotline of the entire season, as set up by Alejandro's speech at the end of the second episode. While every other plotline I've talked about in this video comes and goes, with perhaps the Cody and Sierra one as an exception, Alejandro and Heather's terror over the game lasts the entirety of the season. And yeah, sorry not to bury the lead, but it's really impressive. Like, it's the most well done and effective story that the entire 100+ episode of the Total Drama franchise has ever pulled off. To first talk about it from Alejandro's perspective, he's easily the best villain the franchise has ever had. I have a lot of praise for Heather and Island and the Ice Skaters and Redonkulous Race, but neither of them hold a candle to Al's villainy in the season. He has his hand in literally every single plot and seems almost impervious to any opposition. I mean, seriously, just look at every other section in this video. He eliminated the entirety of Team Victory, eliminated a good chunk of his own team, forced Tyler to reveal that Duncan and Gwen kissed as the main point of a couple of aftermaths, and forced the biggest rift between Sierra and Cody with the altered photograph. There is really no element of Alejandro in these first 23 episodes to criticize, as he's really one of the best written characters in the entire franchise. Speaking of the best written characters in the entire franchise, on the other side of the Alejandro coin is Heather. This season, Heather Heather was due for a bounce back after being voted out pretty quickly in action. Anyway, this season was set up with a ridiculous task, which was to take the least liked and most villainous character in the show and make them into a hero by the end, all while not drastically changing her core character. And lo and behold, in a series known for the fanbase loves to call character derailment, which by the way is really just a characteristic of Turtle Drama truly being one of the purest comedies and not really caring at all about having jokes at the cost of happy endings, this show still nails Heather's entire character arc this season. She's toned down a bit from Island, but is still the selfish, villainous, popular girl from the first 2 seasons. The show really takes a pretty interesting route with Heather and Alejandro this season, making them both the leaders of their respective teams. It works really well to feed into their feud and to allow their feud to persist in every single competition episode. I think it fits that both of their respective teams, which I've talked about already in this video, are both terrible for different reasons. Team Chris can't stay focused because they're made up of unathletic goofballs, and Amazon can't stay focused because Gwen and Courtney are too busy trying to kill each other while Sierra is too focused on harassing Cody for 22 minutes an episode. These weaknesses both fit their respective villainous leaders, as both characters are able to somewhat rein their teams into occasional victory through their different strengths. Of course, while these two characters are both powerhouses on their own, the season, and really the franchise, is at its peak whenever they interact. Towards the end of the season is when they really start working together, partially as a result of the budding romance between them. After teaming up for the first time to eliminate Duncan, the pair reached their collaborative apex in Drumheller when Alejandro helps save Heather from a boulder. Now obviously this moment is played up a bit as both of them end up losing and both of them would have lost anyway, but besides just giving us a top 5 song for the season, it also gives a great turn for the last arc of the episode. Heather immediately double-crossing Alejandro is fair given the information that she learns from Sierra right before voting about the altered photograph, but it's still kind of a shocking twist. The betrayal leads fantastically well into the effective 3-part finale, with Heather and Alejandro both establishing in Drumheller that they are both villainous, fearsome, and worth winning the $1 million. Speaking of which, I think we're finally ready to break past the episode 23 barrier and get into the final trio of episodes we've yet to discuss. Alright, considering that the entire video can be considered setup for this section, I think we're safe to just jump right into episode 24, the final aftermath with Hawaiian style. While I think there is some stiff competition, I think it's pretty safe to say that this is my favorite aftermath in the entire series. It's just a really fantastic episode through and through. We've got 2 great songs, a great premise, and the Bruno Jeff stuff is really kept to a relative minimum while still feeling like a good send-off to Jeff and Bridget. And really, I think that every single character ends up rooting for the character that you would guess, as Alejandro's fanbase is made up of mostly vain or generally moronic characters, and Courtney, and the rest are on Team Cody. Anyway, the jokes are funny in this one, being the last time that we really get to see most of these characters, as they're pretty much silent in the next episode, and the final challenge is a really fun one. It definitely puts into question whether or not these characters get to watch the episodes, as Courtney really shouldn't be as fond of Alejandro as she is if she's actually seen the episode, but alas, I guess someone competent needed to be on his side, so it makes sense. Anyway, the great final aftermath leads really well into episode 25, Planes, Trains, and Hot Air Mobiles. While I get this episode as a fan favorite for a lot of people, with I bet a good chunk of people calling it their favorite from the season, I found myself a bit disappointed by it. Separating Cody and Sierra makes it so that Alejandro and Heather can have some great moments, but it also means a good chunk of the episode is just more Cody and Sierra, as not even her own elimination can save us from having to listen to Sierra scream for half the episode. Anyway, obviously Heather and Alejandro in this episode are completely and utterly fantastic, but that's a constant in the season, and I think it's done better in the last episode before this with the Minute and Drumheller, and the next one in Hawaii. So yeah, I think this episode ultimately plays second fiddle to the finale, and definitely should have included the Cody-Alejandro duel that opens up Hawaiian Punch. Speaking of which, after like 8,000 words worth of rambling about the show, I think we're finally ready to get to the season finale. The Alejandro-Cody duel itself is cool, although its placement at the beginning of this episode kinda diminishes that. It's cool to leave Cody in the game until the last episode, so you can call him a finalist or whatever, but it does kind of feel like the show just has to quickly get rid of him so they can get to the good part of the finale. Which, yeah, the next couple of minutes are truly tremendous, really peak total drama. Besides just watching Cody and Harold battle mostly Courtney, which is a really enjoyable experience by the way, we also get the final showdown between the titans of the season. I've already talked about how much I love the song, so I'll skip to the trek up the mountain. It's really interesting to watch Heather embrace the underdog role when she really has never done that in the series. It's really impressive how the writers are able to quickly shift her into that role, especially when they undermine the concept and still have Alejandro easily make it to the top of the mountain first. It's super impressive, and the final moment with Heather doing to Alejandro what he did to countless female contestants throughout the season feels like the ultimate ending to both of their arcs, as Alejandro's ultimate weakness ends up being what he exploited in other people, and Heather learns to win as the hero instead of the villain. A truly fantastic ending to the season that... Wait, what? Oh yeah, we're not done talking about this episode yet. This is where you learn, probably like 30 minutes into the video, that the word perfected in the title is a lie and that the season does actually have flaws. So let's dive into them in the most negative section of this video yet. First off, this season obviously continues the trend in the series to have a different winner depending on what country you watch the episode in. So if you watched my video on Total Drama Island earlier this year, which you didn't and definitely shouldn't, it's a bad video, you know my feelings on this, which is that it's a neat concept in concept, but a dangerously bad practice in practice. It means that who wins the season, which should be the ending to a character's arc, changes based on where you happen to see the episode, as well as making it so that no future seasons can reference the ending of the season. I hate that the show does this, and I think I'm one of the few people who would be very glad to see it disappear in the upcoming reboot. Of course, despite the fact that in Canada, Alejandro, the villain of the season, wins, completely undermining his and Heather's entire arc, it ends up not mattering at all, as the show gets a little reference happy and decides they're not only going to have Ezekiel jump into the lava and take it from Heather/Chris, but also that Alejandro needs to be put in a Vader suit for over a year, because apparently losing $1 million isn't enough of a punishment for being kinda sneaky on a reality TV show, and they need to show his body gruesomely burnt. Now I get that Total Drama is no stranger to heavily injuring a character for karmic punishment, with Justin in action and especially Blaineley this season. The show even does it to non-deserving characters like Owen and Cody and Action and Island respectively, but all of those injuries pale in comparison to the severity of what happens to Alejandro, and it just feels hard to watch. All of that's not even mentioning how dumb it is that pineapples activate volcanoes in this universe, and that the literal last word of the season is probably going to have to be changed due to insensitivity when the show is inevitably placed onto HBO Max. Add all of that together and you get the worst couple of minutes of the entire season and the most important place in the entire season, right at the end. I know my voice is gone, but I really need to get across that while I understand that this is just me being too sensitive to fully enjoy the humor that the show goes for in doing this, but whatever value this is supposed to have is just lost on me. And yeah, it leads to a finale that leaves a bad taste in your mouth, even if it is largely really good as a finale. So where did the abysmal final 2 or so minutes of the season leave it as a whole? Well, because my voice is almost gone, I'm just going to summarize it as really, really good. 2 minutes out of 500 for the season isn't going to break it, and everything good about it that I mentioned still applies. This season is the best thing so far to come out of the franchise, and the new seasons coming up have a ton to live up to if they want to hold a candle. Through the funniest jokes in the show, some truly fantastic songs, the best settings and challenges in the series, multiple fantastic arcs, and a truly villainous final 2, Total Drama World Tour feels like every element of the show perfected. It's just kind of unfortunate that it's followed by 3 seasons of mediocrity or worse. Anyway, I already struggled to really add much in the conclusion of these half-hour plus videos since I've already gone on for so long, so I'll leave it here. If you guys like the video, you can subscribe down below. Unless this video completely bombs, I'm almost certainly going to do this style of video for another season of Total Drama, because as you can tell, I have a lot of opinions about it. I'm not really sure which one I'm going to do next though. I'm probably not going to do Island or Action, but I'm really pretty open to doing any of the other 4 competition seasons. I'm leaning towards Redonkulous Race just because it's the only one I would actually look forward to watching again, but I get the appeal of listening to me complain about All-Stars for like 20 minutes. So I would really appreciate it if you guys would let me know which one you want me to see cover in the comments. Anyway, the video isn't going to be next anyway. I'll probably tackle it closer to the end of the year. So if you want to see updates on that or anything I make, you can check out my Twitter. But besides that, I think I'm finally done. This has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in about 3 weeks for a shorter video that won't have 11 timestamps in it. Thanks for watching.